if you like Psych with Mike, here's a couple of ways that you could really help us out. You could subscribe to the show on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok at Psych with Mike. But the two things that would really, really help us out is subscribing to us on YouTube, search Psych with Mike, but also going to Apple Podcasts and leaving us a review and a comment. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Welcome into the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and I am here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Mr. Brett Newcomb.
How are you today?
I'm doing really well. You have a dog.
I had a dog.
That's why I was wondering. Did your son take the dog?
It was technically my son's dog. I mean, he was the justification for which we obtained the dog. Mm-hmm. We always say, well, it's your dog, especially when it messed up. Mm-hmm. You know, your dog's acting out. Then he went off to college, and he came home, and he lived with us for a couple of years, and we were all in harmony together. And they bought a house. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'm taking the dog. So he did.
Mm-hmm. And
or I said, you're taking the dog. I'm not sure
yeah.
But at any rate,
I wasn't going to argue the point.
We're currently dogless.
Yeah. And you are you okay with your son's name?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. So you got the dog for Spencer, and you got that. Originally, your guys' thinking was what?
A boy needs a dog.
Yeah.
Because when his parents are unfair and abusive and hateful and horrible and bad, he needs to be able to go off in the corner with the dog and tell him his troubles. Mm-hmm. And the dog will love him and attend to him and snuggle him in very healing ways. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying that sarcastically, but I mean it in the most genuine way. Mm-hmm. It really is beneficial. And I have always believed, I had this conversation with my wife, but I've never had daughters, so I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I know for boys, for when I was a child, my own personal experience, but my two sons always had dogs. Mm-hmm. Always found an outlet for my bad parenting, for release from the effects of my bad parenting with the dog.
And my guess is that most people know this, that this wouldn't be a surprise to anybody, that there is a long history of the use of animals, not just dogs, but primarily dogs.
In my experience, horses are almost as common as dogs.
Yeah.
And other animals, much more rare, much more exotic, but possible.
Right.
A bird or a lizard or something.
Well, so when people ask me...
Not so much cats.
Yeah. When people ask me, can a bird, can a cat, not so much cats, but can a bird, can a lizard, can a snake be a therapy animal? My answer is that if it is comforting to you, then the answer is yes. But the reason why we would believe that an animal is therapeutically valuable is because of their ability to reflect empathic actions, responsiveness to the individual.
Yeah, and so
so you have to have a limbic system.
Lower order animals.
Yeah, don't have a limbic system. They don't have emotions.
Yeah.
So they don't have empathy.
To me, it's more of a challenge to conceptualize that.
Right.
Somebody say, "Oh, my pet rabbit, climbs up in my lap and loves me." No, they can be the receiver of your love and affection, and you can benefit from that, from petting.
They can be the soft, cuddly, But a snake is not going to give you empathic responses.
Not going to give me any empathic responses, no matter what the circumstances.
Right. And so, if
I just asked my friend Adam.
Right.
Yeah.
So if the answer is that it reduces your level of anxiety, then that animal could be therapeutic for you. But as a rule, most of the time, if we're looking for an animal to provide therapeutic value, it's going to be an animal that we know is able to reflect empathy.
I think it's going to be a herd animal of some kind.
Well, so according to science, elephants are the most empathic animals that we know of. They tend not to be very easily used in
They're
therapy.
unwieldy.
Yeah. But dolphins are also highly empathic, again, not easily used in therapy. And then you get into horses and dogs, and horses and dogs are the next two most empathic animals that
I have several friends who've specialized in using horses in therapy. They have special certifications for doing it. And of course, there's an added expense. You've got to have a place to keep a horse and take care of a horse and all that. But especially from what they tell me, teenagers who are really suffering from emotional distress can respond to a horse, and what these therapists tell me is the horse knows. The horse reads the mood, and they actually have specialized in training in getting a horse to do what they want it to do without using words. The therapist does. So they can have the horse follow them around in a circle inside a paddock just through projecting that that's what they want the horse to do. I have not done it. I have seen it done. I had one client that was a horsewoman, owned and raised and had raised horses all of her life, was also a therapist who used horses in therapy, and so she had this certification. But she got thrown from a horse and landed on a fence post and cracked her pelvis. And so the first time or two that she was going to go back to ride the horse, she wanted me as a clinician to go with her and walk in the paddock with her and the horse so that I, through my presence, could keep her calm so the horse would stay calm, because she had this anxiety about the pain from the injury, not about the horse, but she didn't want the horse to pick up the anxiety and become anxious and unruly. And so we did that a couple times, and then she said, you can go, I'm good now. And she still rides her horse.
And my wife and I have started watching, we were looking for a new show because we had run out of some episodes of a show that we were watching, and we came across this show called Heartland, which is about a ranch in Canada, and the main character on the ranch is like a horse whisperer. Her mother was a horse whisperer. She's inherited this ability, and it's all about exactly that, like that you know, the horse senses what you want the horse to do, and when the horse does that, that's how you know that you've broken the horse, is that the horse will accept you as the dominant, and the horse will react to the things that you empathically are wanting the horse to do, and that's the basis of the whole show. So I think that there's probably some legitimacy to that. Obviously, as you say, if you're going to do horses, you have to have specialized training. You have to have the ability to have horses.
Space equipment.
And so for most of us, our most familiar connection to animal-assisted therapy would be with dogs.
Yes.
So people do take their animals to the office with them, and they do allow the animals.
Clinicians do.
Yeah.
Freud did. He had his dog in his sessions. But also, healthcare systems regularly now provide that for retirement homes and hospitals. They have organizations bring in groups of puppies to sit with and visit with the people in the old folks home, you know, and people who are suffering from Alzheimer's can still empathically connect with the dog, and it can quiet the person in the midst of their agitation, anger, distress, to have an empathic dog snuggle up to them.
And
so this is not like a service dog, like helping a blind person walk down the street. It's not the same kind of training for the animal for the.
Yeah, so the person who had suggested this topic is a client of mine, and she actually did train service animal. Or she actually was the person who raised the dogs from being a puppy until they could go into service training. Yeah. So she just did the basic command structure training, and then if the dog met certain requirements, they would go into the service academy. And you know, when they come out, they're like between $25,000 and $50,000 dogs.
Well, they're trained,
and they're amazing.
Specific behavioral trainings.
But an aspect of this that people may not realize.
Monkeys even have been trained that way.
Yeah, I would be I'd be cautious about a monkey, but just because of the ability they have opposable thumbs, they can do things that other animals can't do. They're incredibly strong, and we have seen situations where that's become problematic and even life-threatening.
As they age, especially the males.
Yeah.
But there's a window for all of us. I mean, as we age, we develop problems. But they can be trained for extreme care situations for a limited period of time. And they go in and they get your medicine, they bring it to you, they bring you on command, a glass of water or soda, or they can open it and bring it to you if you can't do it yourself.
And people say, how is this happening? Well, we don't really completely understand it. We do understand that these animals have a limbic system. They have all of the biological capacity that humans have to be able to experience empathy. We think that's a part of it, but also dogs have been trained to sniff out certain kinds of cancer. So a dog can smell a human being and within a 98% confidence interval identify whether that individual has, this is true, you can look it up.
No, I'm remembering. When I was a child, I had a
and
neighbor.
They were doing that for coronavirus during this.
Yes.
Yeah.
I had a neighbor that had asthma, and whenever he was about to have an asthma attack, he had a Chihuahua dog. The dog would get up in his lap or climb into bed with him, and it would either minimize or avoid the asthma attack. And so people, this is back in the 50s, people were saying, oh, he's an asthma dog, which I thought was ridiculous. But
so the idea there being that the dogs can smell the hormonal changes inside the human body, and they are actually good enough at that they can be used as a clinical diagnostic tool for identifying cancer. They have trained some dogs to be able to smell coronavirus. Now that has not been as widespread because we haven't had as much time. Eventually, though, the dogs did show promise being able to smell the coronavirus in a human body. And I don't know that there'll be enough of them trained to make a difference before the pandemic is over. But there may end up being places in the world, not in the United States, but other places in the world where dogs will be used as a therapeutic diagnostic tool for coronavirus. But if a dog can smell cancer, if a dog can smell coronavirus, then a dog can smell anxiety.
I've even read of situations where
Speaking of a dog,
were believed to smell death.
Yes.
And know that someone was
in advance. Yes, they can smell the hormones because there is a hormonal release that happens just before we throw off this mortal coil, and dogs can sense that.
Yeah.
So these animals have this biological capacity, and because they actually appear to be even more empathic than human beings, then it stands to reason if empathy is a significant aspect of the therapeutic rapport, that if other animals have even greater capacities for empathy, then they could be helpful in treating certain psychological disorders.
Well, there's just so many things that we don't know about all of that stuff. For instance, it's fairly accepted that animals know if there's going to be an earthquake, even the birds. It's what's telling them that? How are they getting that information? But they seem to be able to have it. So then what? Can we learn, and can we adapt? Can we use what we learn to help other people? And in therapy, especially because of the emotional volatility of what happens in therapy, if you have a dog, and I know a number of therapists that take their dog to work, you can even get certified by the American Counseling Association to be an animal-assisted therapist. You train your dog. You take your dog you train your dog to behave. You train your dog not get in somebody's lap and whatever. But in the presence of a lot of strong emotions, emotional release, there are certain behaviors that you can support the dog having that can be helpful to the client and to the therapist as observational. Okay, your dog's pacing now. I think you're starting to get more agitated than I'm aware of. Can we talk about that?
And one of the reasons why that's beneficial is that if you say, or I say, if the therapist says, I'm not pointing you out, but if the therapist says, "Oh, I see that you are, bouncing your leg, is that a sign of anxiety?" They may be resistant to that, but they're much more open if you say, "Oh, Spot is really acting agitated.
Spot is on.
I wonder.
Spot on.
Yeah, I wonder if that's in reaction to something you're going through." They will be much more willing to accept that as a signal of their own internal distress than if you identify one of their nonverbal behaviors.
They don't interpret any judgment.
Exactly. Right.
But if you suggest it, then you've made some kind of a judgment that they might resist.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's run to our break, and we'll pick this up on the other side. Hey, Brett, if you were going to tell somebody to check out something on the internet to help them with their mental health, what would you tell them?
I'd tell them to listen to Psych with Mike.
Why would you tell them that?
Because it's probably one of the most easily listenable experiences you can have that will give you information that's useful for a whole spectrum of concerns that people have.
I agree, and I have actually been told that by at least a dozen people, several of whom were not married to me, and some of them didn't even know me.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. When we get that kind of feedback from people, it is so incredibly humbling and overwhelming for me.
It is for both of us.
Yeah. So we really appreciate it. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. All right, we're back. So in the situation of therapy, I believe that empathy is an essential foundational component of good therapy. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. And so that's, for me, where bringing an animal into that equation is beneficial, is that it's in the therapeutic response, and it's about what you said, which I, just before the break, which I think is probably the most salient point. People don't experience judgment from the animal where they would even if they felt comfortable in the therapeutic rapport with the therapist. And so it's a way of accessing their ability to experience their own anxiety, trauma, whatever, in a way that feels non-judgmental. And that's why it's beneficial. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I think conceptually I understand it as a way to project onto the animal feelings that we can talk about and interpret, that you don't have to take ownership for initially, or you don't have to be accused about initially. We can just talk about agitation, awareness of agitation, what might be the agitation. I mean, we can explore the topic conversationally without getting in anybody's face.
And then an added bonus to that is when you look at the scientific aspect of it, human beings, when they pet animals, their oxytocin levels, so their pro-social hormones associated with feelings of contentment, are elevated. So just petting an animal stops you from dumping adrenaline and cortisol, which are stress-related hormones, into your system, and promotes the delivery of these pro-social hormones like oxytocin and endorphins and enkephalins. And so there's a real biology associated with having the animal there that doesn't happen if it's just you and the client. And I'm not saying everybody should do animal-assisted therapy. Neither you or I have ever practiced that way. But there is a biological component associated with it, just as there is a psychological component.
So segue to a different domain. Yeah. I have a couple of friends that were raised on farms, and they believe strongly that animals are products or service animals, tools to work with around. And none of them have ever had pets. They don't have inside animals, none of them. And yet whenever they would come around, my dogs would always go to them for attention, and you could see that they're really uncomfortable. They don't. I mean, you have to teach your dog to leave them alone because they want to go over and have Ed touch them, and Ed doesn't want to touch dog, and he's not into dogs. He doesn't. He dislikes dogs. He doesn't want a dog, and he's not going to have a dog in the house
because they see dogs as work animals.
Yes.
Yeah, and the same thing was true.
At least that's been my experience. I had several friends for whom that's a truism.
My wife's Irish setter is named Indiana. We named the dog Indiana. Is named Indiana because we went to Indiana to get him. And when we went there, we did not know this at the time, but he was bred and being raised on an working Amish farm. And they didn't have inside animals. And surprisingly enough, his original name was Spencer. That's true.
Spencer's an inside animal. Yeah.
Well, your Spencer is. This Spencer wasn't, and but so it was a man and his wife, and they had what looked to me at the time to be a 7 or 8 year old son, and their son had taken a particular fancy to Spencer, and he would sneak him inside when the parents didn't know. And the dad, you could tell, was not as comfortable with that as the mom. Like the mom was, it seemed like, was not willing to chastise him for this, but the dad was like, our dogs don't live inside. And that was their experience because they see those dogs as work animals or as products. They were willing to sell us the dog, but they weren't going to have the dog as a pet.
Yeah, I was just thinking culturally, there's so many dog stories out there. Movies like Lassie, TV series Lassie, Benji, Greyfriars Bobby, all about dogs that have this incredible empathic connection to human beings, to the extent that when their human dies, they go and lay on the grave. There is validity and understanding that can be helpful in therapy if you have the correct approach and the correct training, and you can incorporate it in appropriate ways. It can be an added leg up for some people.
So you're saying that if somebody were going to therapy and just randomly the therapist has a rabbit in their office, that's not necessarily animal-assisted therapy?
It's absolutely not.
Okay.
Yeah. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah. And so... And actually, now I'm just thinking about this on the fly. Would you say that the therapist needs to cultivate a different relationship with that animal to use it as a therapy animal?
I don't know the mechanics of that because, as you said earlier, we've never been involved with that.
Right. So if you're out there and you do animal-assisted therapy,
you want to talk about it?
Yeah.
My initial assumption would be that you would need to teach the animal not to approach people without a command.
At least basic behavioral commands, absolutely. But would the therapist need to have, like, if I were going to take whatever, my wife's dog, my dog, to the office and use that animal as a therapy adjunct, now that we're talking about this, I think that I would need to develop a different relationship with that animal than just that animal is my pet.
I don't know. I really don't know. And I don't have an opinion. My concerns would be more, at least initially, in how good a control you have over the dog, assuming it's a dog. If it's a rabbit or something, I don't know anything about that. But and how empathically connected you are to, and it's the dog. I mean, in my experience, a lot of dogs are one-owner dogs.
Right.
In a family, one person in a family that they attach to or bond with. So if I'm using a dog as a therapy dog, do I want it to transfer its emotional sensitivity on command, or just in the presence of intensity, or how do I use that in a facilitative way to help my client?
Right.
And I don't know. I don't know enough about it, so I would have to have information that I don't currently have.
And I don't know either, and that's why I say if you're out there and you're doing animal-assisted therapy, you have a specialization in that. I would love to talk to somebody, but as I'm thinking about this, just because the dog is up running around may mean that there's anxiety in the room, but doesn't necessarily mean it's the client. And so,
exactly.
I think the therapist has to be very careful not to project onto the animal that whatever the animal is experiencing is coming from the client, because they have to be introspective enough to own their own stuff.
I'm in way over my head. But I have several friends who are licensed therapists who use horses. Mm-hmm. I don't know any right now that use dogs, but in the St. Louis area, it's an accessible tool.
Yeah, equine therapy is just huge in St. Louis.
Yeah.
And it's something that I am absolutely fascinated by, and have never gotten any training, have never witnessed it, but absolutely would like to.
I think you have to start in the stables with a shovel.
Yeah. Which I would not necessarily be against doing. It's just like with everything, you just need time, right? I mean, time, if I had enough time.
And a shovel.
So, obviously, maybe not obviously, but you're not going to do animal-assisted therapy. You're retired.
I'm not going to do people therapy.
Yeah, I'm not going to probably do animal-assisted therapy. I don't see that in my future, but I do believe in it, and I do believe that there are certain factions of the therapy-seeking community that could really benefit from it.
Well, there may even be populations. People with strokes and brain injuries who suffer from ataxia and aphasia may be more responsive to pets.
I think that small children, it might be a really beneficial thing. Adults who either are nonverbal or have difficulty with communication, I think it could be really, really beneficial. I think there are certain populations, certain areas where this could be just transcendently life-changing. Yeah. But,
as part of a larger comprehensive package.
Mm-hmm. But it's just like everything else. I mean, you have to tailor that to the individual. Yeah. And some people are not going to respond well to my therapeutic style, which I would never take offense to. I've always said, there are a million different therapists in the world, so that you can find the one that's right for you.
Well, we all serve different markets.
Yeah. And if it's not me, I don't want you spending money because somebody said something nice about me. I want you to find what works for you, and I will in no way be offended. But I don't think that we can assume that every key unlocks every lock.
Absolutely not. I used to say regularly to new clients or prospective clients, come see me a couple times. If you don't think I'm a good fit and you don't want to come back, then don't pay me.
Right.
But if you decide to come back after 2 visits, pay me for the 2 visits plus any more that you have. Mm-hmm. I was comfortable with that and would regularly offer it.
And just because you love dogs doesn't mean that you should find a therapist that's doing animal-assisted therapy. There are certain ways in which that's really helpful in certain populations that I think it can be super beneficial for. But there are other people, I was just going to say, but there are other times when I think, the dog in the corner becomes a way to deflect.
Yeah.
And then that's just about, now I have an additional resistance tool to be able to utilize, and that may not always be beneficial.
Yeah, like making a joke or lighting a cigarette or getting up and pacing. All things that we talked about.
When I teach perspectives and when I teach counseling theory, I show the old movies of Gloria with Albert Ellis and Fritz Perls and who was the third one?
Albert Ellis.
Carl Rogers.
Carl Rogers. Yeah.
And, and they're all smoking up a storm. Yeah. And in 2020, or 2021, students will say, how is that? I'm just like, back then,
society's changed.
You smoked in the hospital back then.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, so that was just the way things were.
On oxygen.
Right. Well, I mean, I've seen people
take their oxygen outside to smoke outside. Now they have to go. Yep.
Stand
and hold it way over here.
So when I was working in the hospital, I would go and take away cigarettes from people when they were on oxygen, and they'd just get so mad. I'd say, look, if you want to blow yourself up, that's okay with me. You just don't have the right to blow me up.
When I first moved to St. Louis, they had smoking sections in the movie theaters. Mm-hmm. They had smoking sections on the planes. It just everybody smoked. I grew up with people smoking in a car with kids in the back seat.
Oh my God!
I mean, I can't tell you how many times I got burned by cigarettes that they flicked out that blew back in the back window because we didn't have air conditioning in the car. I mean, the world has changed.
It's just the way it was.
Yeah, which gives encouragement and hope to MAD.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe.
The world has changed.
The world has changed.
The world is changing.
And it is changing.
It's not nearly the cute go-to behavior to be a drunk driver that it once was.
Right. But in all of the changes that I have witnessed in my 57 years, not all of those have been good. So the world is changing. Yeah. And some things like, the use of nicotine are radically different from when I was a child. But then there are other challenges,
First time I went to France was 35 years ago, and I've been back a number of times since then. When I first went to France, everybody there smoked like everybody in America smoked in the 1950s. You couldn't go anywhere that people weren't smoking. And now when I go, I'm rarely around people that smoke. And if they do, they excuse themselves and go away from the group and smoke. They don't smoke in their houses. They don't smoke in their cars. They don't smoke in their restaurants. Their culture is changing around that idea the same way ours did.
And it just makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, the more you know, probably the less you would want to smoke. And if you do want to smoke, then you would not inflict that on other people.
You are to others. Exactly.
Yeah. All right, hopefully that was beneficial for people. If you have comments or if there's a topic that you would like us to talk about, you can always get us at psychwithmike.com. The music that appears in psychwithmike.com is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.